Okay, so Angela, thank you very much for joining me. Where are you joining us from?
Melbourne, Australia. Very, very sunny
Okay,
all year round.
okay. So tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and why you decided you're going to get Storyteller Tactics, Angela.
So I work in marketing and copywriting that converts. So I specialize in anything that helps businesses grow and make money. And the reason why I came to PipDex is because I'd seen so many ads. So yes, proof that Facebook ads do work. I felt like I had to own this. But the main thing was one of my largest clients was actually approaching me saying, hey, we're running a whole bunch of holistic marketing campaigns,
Right.
and we really need to have a storyline or a concept for each of them. Can you help with us with that? And I'm like, sure can. And then I do go on Facebook for my usual, scroll for
Yeah.
whatever it is. And PipDex was the ad that came up, and I'm like, oh, this is what I actually really needed. Now it has Storyteller Tactics, and I had done Story Brand with Donald Miller a while ago, but I thought that's really great because we had implemented that in this particular brand, which is my largest client. But when we're doing holistic marketing campaigns, it doesn't always work as well. I needed something that was more that I could use for a campaign idea and unpack that a little bit differently to what we would do with a normal brand kind of website homepage kind of look. These are going to be different campaigns with landing pages with different problems that we're addressing for the ideal client. So
Well,
that's why
just
I came to
to Vivdex,
storytelling.
okay. No, so
Yeah.
the just to distinguish from for people's benefit, the difference
Yeah.
between the holistic approach that this client was asking for and the more kind of simple, narrow approach. What was the what did your client what were they asking for when they were asking for this holistic approach?
So what they were asking for was that they were looking at particular, I have to think about how I'm going to word it, because there are 5 different problems that I've identified that we had done extensive customer interviews. And
Yep.
what I had done was identified what was the repeating themes. And from that, we created like themes that were going to be for each campaign. So when they talk about holistic campaigns, they mean it's going to be addressing one particular problem and one particular aspect that our ideal clients are facing, and how our product or service helps with that.
Without obviously breaching any kind of client confidentiality, are you able to
Yeah.
give us a little bit of detail on, for example, pick out one of those themes that emerged and you thought, right, okay, here's something we need a story to bring this to life.
Oh, sure. So I can talk about the one I'm working on right now, and that's the one I went to Storyteller Tactics for.
Yep.
We were looking at how many steps that people go through just to get to the link in someone's Instagram profile. So the issue was that was the main thing that people are doing, and my client software is one that eliminates that kind of thing, and it's Instagram approved. So basically they were saying there are lots of these problems, but how are we going to tell the story throughout the page and get the ideal client excited, and also explain the product in a really easy to understand way, because it's not a very, very technical product, but when you
Yep.
get inside it, it is. But what it does simply is, very easy to understand once you unpack it. But we
Hmm.
just needed to make sure that when we were telling the story of how someone is, going to make sales on Instagram, it needs to be something that's really interesting to them and
Yep.
something that they can identify with and have that kind of transformation story.
Got it. Got it. Okay. 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 So then you need to you've identified a kind of client with a problem and
Yeah.
your client has a solution to the problem. Okay. So in what how was Storyteller Tactics then kind of where did you start when you sort of you know what your problem is? You've got to help
Yep.
this client deliver a message to their
Mhm.
clients or potential clients. Okay, so where does Storyteller Tactics come in? Where do you start with the process?
So what I did was I didn't have the physical cards. I do have them now. Very
Ooh.
exciting. But because I live so far away, I knew they were going to take a while to reach me from the UK. So what had happened was I got the digital ones and I just went through the PDF and tried to find the best kind of story, because I knew there were some things in there that, like the concept, I didn't really need. I needed kind of like, I can't remember what it's called now for the life of me, but it was the turning point. So it was the card with the turning point, but I was looking at that particular part of the pip decks.
Hmm.
But I know I didn't need something like a concept because we already had the concept, and we
Yep.
didn't need certain things. There were some things that didn't apply to this particular story and this particular client only because we'd done all the background work. So we had the
Yeah.
ideal client, we had the problem, we knew what concept we wanted to go with, but we just didn't know how we were going to communicate it. And I thought the turning point would be the best one for this audience because we had decided that we needed to take it from the ideal audience's point of view and take them through that story and write it from that kind of point of view first, and then we could try and unpack it that way. But it worked really well being the turning point story, because it was we were able to go, this is what you're doing now, this is why it's not working, you have a big problem when this is happening, and this is what can happen afterwards. So they really needed to understand that, like, we needed to position our product as like the realization and the change that had to happen within this our target audience's life on Instagram and how they're making sales on Instagram.
So it sounds like the turning point. These emerge really clearly in the structure cards on the ones with the blue edges.
Yes, the blue. That's what I
So
remember.
yeah,
Just blue.
yeah.
Yeah.
So these are the ones like Man in a Hole and Rags to Riches
Yeah.
and No Easy Way.
Yes.
Interestingly, those are the cards that do kind of, those three lend themselves really well to this kind of thing, because they all end in a positive.
Yeah.
Okay, there's kind of turning points, but they all end up in a good place,
Yeah.
which is what what you aim, what you hope is going to happen for your
Yes.
clients. So it's interesting you said though that the other cards earlier in the deck, you didn't really need them because you kind of knew what the problem was, and you knew who the
Yeah.
target was, and you knew what you were trying to do. I think that's really interesting because there are certain cards in the earlier set about going through the data or looking at people's behavior,
Mm.
and you've done that.
Oh, we did that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very big client. So luckily they had everything, and they'd given us the data. They'd given us 100 and something customer interviews. They'd pulled
Okay.
out pull quotes. So, and then I went in and put that into a framework for my client to use, and they've approved the 10 the 10 actual the 10, that's what I felt like, 10 commandments, the 10
Yeah, yeah.
themes that they want to go with. But the thing was, because we have so many stakeholders, this is a really interesting thing, is because when you have so many stakeholders, you get a lot of feedback. So I get feedback from different teams, and so it can become quite overwhelming
Yeah.
if you don't have like a structure like the ones that are available in the Storyteller Tactics. Because if you don't have that structure, you're getting so much feedback from different stakeholders telling you how they think the story should be, or
Right.
how they think that the campaign should be executed, and they all
Yeah.
have different levels of interest. So coming from marketing, we are different to, say, product marketing that market the product. And I had interesting feedback when I presented the turning point story. Product marketing was like, but how about how intuitive our product is? I'm like, well, they don't care. Like, where do you ever see that in marketing? Does anyone ever say, we love the products, it's so intuitive? I'm like, I think that's like something that they expect. It's like a base
Yes.
level. It's not something that they go, oh my God, we love it, it's so intuitive. They expect it to work at this point. You have an iPhone with you every day of your life. If that's not intuitive and not touchscreen's not working, you're going to be really frustrated. So it was really interesting to have like all these stakeholder kind of feedback, but we were able to like just keep it into this like kind of story. I'm like, if we don't deviate from the story, we've got a really powerful story. So it was just, it's really good to have that structure, and then you can kind of take on board relevant like feedback, and then push
Yeah.
back on feedback that's going to push your story somewhere that it shouldn't be going.
So did you, from memory, do you know whether you went with No Easy Way or Man in a Hole? Did you go with one particular story arc and thinking, right, well, this is what we need, we need this story structure?
I cannot remember. I'd have to look. It was a couple of weeks ago now, so I can look at which one I did take. If you want to wait while I go through what I did do, or we can come back to it.
We can come back to it.
Yeah.
So I think so. It's really interesting. There is a so even within the concept cards, there are certain framings which do allow you to kind of, frames are good because obviously they allow you to put things into focus, but they also allow you to keep things out.
Yes.
So this is not in the frame. We don't need to worry about this. So I think there's a really interesting kind of framing device between between order and chaos. So there's so either you're trying to, what you're doing is trying to take the messy chaos and create some order, bring this into sort of settle things down a bit, or you're saying, look, this is really stiff and rigid and we need to shake it up and introduce a bit of chaos. And I think once you've got that as a framing device, there's only one other option. It's either you're trying to impose order, or you're trying to exploit chaos, or you're saying let's do nothing, let's just do nothing. And that so that gives you a really interesting kind of way of approaching it, and everything else is doing one of those two things, or it's doing nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that is really useful, because that basically allows you to frame and focus where your attention needs to be. So
Mhm.
what was the reaction from the clients when you said, okay, we've got this? So your reaction, your basic message is to the clients, it's got to be about turning points. Yeah,
Yes.
stuff
So
that
what I
changes.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is I only had 24 hours to put this together
Yep.
because they like to, well, now, right? So I had 24 hours to give the turning point as a story, and they were like, great. Product marketing came in and had some feedback. And interestingly enough, parallel to this happening, we have an external creative agency that came up with three concepts. And I'm like,
Right.
oh, okay. So they came back with three concepts that were very, that we could work as an overarching concept. So I've now
Yep.
taken one that they've approved, and I've had a conversation with the VP of Growth Marketing, the CMO has weighed in, and the creative agency. We've taken their ideas to execute them for. It was for a different market, so they're now executing it for their local US market. And what I have done now is taken the overall creative concept and now I've applied the same turning point. So it didn't change too much, the turning point, it just fleshed it out even more because now they've got an overarching concept that they really wanted to go with. So I said, okay, how about we just plug that in to the top of this, and basically everything stays the same. It just means I flesh it out a bit more. And now I've got like a really good arrow and grounding for that. So they were really happy with that kind of story because they know it will convert well. But they just wanted to have a little bit more of a like an ad agency kind of creative concept, which we didn't really have before until they hired the creative agency. So that just helped solidify it a bit more now that they had an overarching concept that they wanted to go with, and then the turning point fits exactly into that kind of overarching creative concept.
So I think this is really interesting. And when you present it in those terms as, okay, this is
Mhm.
all about a turning point, and this is a turning point
Yeah.
for, okay, well, actually, when you're talking to a client, so you're effectively doing you're doing B2B communication. You're talking to
Mhm.
a client about
Yeah.
their client.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, which is what we do a lot of the time in B2B. But what you're saying is, it's not about, certainly not about me. It's not about me, Angela. It's not even about you, my client. It's about
Yeah.
your client's turning point. So
Yeah.
okay. So you're putting the focus very much on, okay, but it has to be about change. And
Yes.
it's really interesting because I think a lot of this often is very implicit. So we kind of, we assume this, okay, it's about change.
Yeah.
When people are kind of, I think my observation working with a lot of different clients is when they're left to their own devices, they come up with a kind of story, and it tends to be a rags to riches story. So I
Mhm.
think 90% of business communication is rags to riches because it's about change, okay, turning points, but it's very much a sort of, you've got a problem, we've got a solution, come with us,
Yeah.
and okay, we'll sort things out.
Yeah.
And okay, it works because, well, because we like optimistic stories and we'd like things to be better, and so it kind of works, wish fulfillment, so it works in that sense. But it's that 90% thing. It's the fact that,
Mhm.
if everyone is saying this, well, how do you stand out? And some people's argument for some way of standing out is to just make it even bigger, so the
Mhm.
problem is even worse and the solution is even better, right?
Yeah.
And that's their way of standing out. But with the ideas of no easy way, man in a hole, the other structure cards that are not just the simple rags to riches, is they have a down as well as an up.
Mhm.
So the man in a hole goes, you're in your comfort zone, things get worse before they get better. Or the no easy way one is, you try this and it doesn't work, and you try and you keep trying. So it's that idea
Yeah.
of there's a down as well as an up.
Yeah.
And those are the stories that really kind of then stand out because, um, well, because life is full of downs as well as ups. Um, so yes, it's really interesting that and also, if you have a kind of roller coaster of a story arc, you have more than one turning point,
Mhm.
which is, so every time the direction changes, right, that will fix people's attention, which is great. Um, Interestingly as well, so the idea of structure, turning points, and change being a really good framing device is very interesting. Did you find, once you've got that in your head, The
Mhm.
next, for me, I think the next thing that people need to do is to really bring that to life with something we can see. And there's we see. So you said before you had 100 interviews with data from 100 interviews with
Yes.
customers.
Yeah.
Okay,
Almost 100.
yeah. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of yes, a lot of data.
Yeah.
But then, of course, you know, and everyone else knows that it's very hard to see data in
Mhm.
the way. So it's very hard to what does almost 100 customers look like?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, yeah. But you talk about one woman running a beauty business through Instagram who, okay, and straight away you kind of start to resolve it down into one person. So when you come to actually telling the story, is that what you encourage people to do? Is like, okay, we've got 100 customers. Let's tell the story of one person, and it's her turning point that matters. Is that the way you approach it?
So I did think and create a full ideal client avatar. So we know we're writing to her because she is predominantly our ideal client representative of her. Even got AI to generate an AI generated image of her. So
Yep.
she's even looking very much like an AI generated image, but she's there.
Yes.
So that really does help when we went through that. So she's in our document. So I create a huge document for them that has all of these things. So they do have the full turning point story, the
Yep.
realization, the decision, the change, everything's in there, as well
Yep.
as like the problem, what is the problem we solve, how do we talk about it, what are our marketing messages, what are we trying to solve, who's our ideal client, what does she want, that kind of, they get a huge like this
Yep.
document,
Yep.
and then I go, here you go, please have at it. So we do definitely do that. But the interesting thing is, I know you're mentioning about problems and talking about one problem. We do talk about our ideal client's problem, but because we are talking about our ideal client being, you know, on Instagram and wanting to make more money from Instagram, we're then talking to their audience as well, saying you're putting your audience through too much to actually make for you to make the sale. You're making them do 9 steps or
Yeah.
something like that to actually go through it. So it's a really interesting thing, because when they came back with feedback, I said, this is cool, but now we're going to do a turning point story for our ideal client, who is, you know, the one we've identified. And now
Yep.
we're talking to their audience saying you're making them do too much. So it's now becoming this whole other Matrix style story where we've got 2 parallel worlds living together. So it's still in its works, but I'm just really interested to see how the next of how we're going. I've done it on the landing page. So the landing page is halfway there of how we're talking about it. So it's going to be a really interesting mix to see how we're going to blend both of them together and talk about their story, and both of them having change and turning points in this story.
Yep. I think it's interesting though. We, you know, you said, well, actually, so there's in a way there's 4 levels of storytelling going
Mm.
on now. So
Mm-hmm.
there's you're here, you're basically talking to your client who is
Yep.
trying to get something through to their target client, who's let's say a business running on Instagram,
Business owner. Yeah.
who is actually speaking to their
Yeah.
customers.
Their
Okay.
audience.
So there's 4 levels of
Yeah.
story here. And actually what's really amazing is that's not particularly difficult for us to get our heads around.
No.
It's not because it all relates back to it basically it's all relational. It's like
Yeah.
um, you know, it's people dealing with people. And we have this kind of incredible ability, I think, and it comes out in story of
Mm.
keeping track of people.
Yes.
And so, you know, if you were to look at sort of 4 levels of, I don't know, like a manufacturing process or 4 levels of analysis, it starts to get pretty difficult. But no, we
Yeah.
don't have any difficulty following your kind of thread through
No.
4 levels of human relationships.
Mm.
Um, so this is really interesting. There's and you know, within each one, there's something similar going on, which is a kind of a guide relationship of I'm trying to guide you to do this. I'm trying to guide,
Yeah.
you're trying to guide them, and she's trying to guide. Okay, so there's a series of guide relationships, um, which is, I suppose, you know, if you were to bring it all down, it sounds like if you were to bring it all down to one kind of really easy way of understanding it, you would say,
Mm.
okay, well, in all of these, I'm just going to sketch something out. In all of these relationships, something similar is going on, and that is, okay, it's a kind of, well, it's some kind of story arc of, well, let's say that's the no easy way, you know, problem, first attempt to solve it doesn't
Yeah.
kind of work out because that wasn't the real problem. Real problem's here, and now we know where we are. Okay, so that's
Mm.
sort of no easy way story arc, and that's, you know, that might apply to you as dealing with the client. So, okay, so in your case, yeah, what's interesting here is that at this point where you're really helping the client to solve the problem, this is where Pipdex comes in and helps you to help your client. Okay, so that's great. That's Pipdex. And then you think, okay, well, my client's trying to do this for the Instagram business. And this is where my client comes in to turn things around for the, okay, well, the Instagram business person is trying to do this for their, okay, so it's all of this, you know, and this is where the Instagram, yeah, so it's all these kind of
Yeah.
ideas that this is how where the structure really, really helps,
Yeah, it
because you're
does.
thinking, okay, I know it's about change, I know it's about turning point. I'm going to use either, I say, rags to riches is the easiest one to use. But actually, within that, you've got potential to go, look, my client, you are the Cinderella here. I'm the fairy godmother. So, you know, so this is, and it's a structure that we instantly understand it.
Mhm.
And it's very, very flexible, because you're going to say you can go down, you know, we've got actually 5 levels. There's of that's 5 levels of turning point story. There's, you know, Pipdex helps Angela to do this.
Mhm.
Angela helps her clients do this. Her clients help the Instagram influencer do this. And
Yeah.
it's story all the way down,
Mhm.
which is great for me.
Yeah, it's
Great,
wonderful.
great for us.
Especially as like a storyteller and copywriters, and we all love to tell stories, so it makes it so much easier. And especially like what you're saying, especially when it comes from an organizational standpoint, when you have a big client that has multiple teams that have give
Yep.
feedback.
Yep.
It's really beneficial just to keep them on the track of we need to tell this story. And the next challenge that I know I'm going to experience is making sure that we stay in that guide mode,
Yep.
helping our ideal client become their own hero, and we're just there holding their hand. Yeah, because I've got multiple teams coming in and trying to position in a different
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, we can't do that. They need to find it on their own. They're gonna, you know, they might not be ready to buy. We're gonna give them something else. We've got a whole strategy. So we're gonna position ourselves as being a great choice, but here's why we're the great choice, rather than like we're the number one choice and strong arm them into like wanting to come with us. We're gonna give them, you know, information that they're really gonna, you know, enjoy and love.
This might tell me this. I don't know if you've come across that card yet, Hero and Guide.
Yeah.
Okay,
That
well
one I
that
looked at as well.
yeah,
Yeah,
'cause
I
that
made sure that we kept in that.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that's really interesting, because it is about putting the focus. The focus is not, you are not the hero on,
Yeah.
you know, and and actually we have a kind of reaction to people who position themselves as the hero of a story, is, well, they're not very modest.
Mhm.
And you know, eventually if someone's just talking about themselves all the time, it's like, oh, you know, come on, mate.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, and actually the reaction to it is more likely to mock them,
Yeah.
than to trust them. Whereas if you can turn that around and say, well, this isn't really about me, but I'm going to help this person here,
Mm.
well, then it's much more generous, and long term, it's a much better strategy. Okay, so listen, we've kind of identified that your way to jump in, you jumped in really quickly by going to the structure cards,
Yeah.
and that allows you to frame things as being about change and turning points in particular, and keep a load of other stuff out of the frame.
Mhm.
Okay. And the hero and guide allows you to, actually, what's interesting, the hero and guide allows you to work on we're now talking at 5 different levels
Mhm.
of turning point. Okay. And all of them, you can keep track of them all, which I think is really interesting,
Mhm.
because you're using story. Whereas trying to keep track of 5 different project timelines or 5 different data sets, well, I know you and I think are quite similar. We'd struggle with that.
Yeah.
We were, just so we could show other people on the call,
Yeah.
we were comparing
Oh, my
to-do
notes.
lists
Oh,
earlier.
wait.
Yeah.
Here we go.
And we've basically got back of envelopes and like
We've got
yeah,
everything. We've got all of the things.
yeah, we've got all the things written
All of
down.
the different ones.
Yeah. So Angela and I both really struggle to keep track of things we need to do, but we
Yeah.
don't struggle to keep track of characters in stories. I mean, what
No.
if you talk about fictional stories? I've just been watching One Day on Netflix, which obviously has two
Uh-huh.
main protagonists. But if you were following Game of Thrones, there are 7 families with,
Yeah. No.
yeah. and you're able to keep track of multiple characters in fiction.
Yeah.
And okay, so we're very, very good at doing this, and therefore story becomes a great way of keeping track of really complex things. Okay, throwing now to somebody who's watching this, and there maybe their Storyteller Tactics has just arrived,
Yep.
and or they're thinking of getting into Storyteller Tactics. What would you say in terms of how's your experience in terms of just getting started? What would you say is the best approach to just to getting started with the cards?
I don't know if I'm the typical approach, and I know a few people have been saying, because there's a wonderful Pipdex Slack community which I adore being a part of and seeing everyone interact in there. But everyone's approaching it in different ways. But I just threw myself in because, as I was mentioning to Steve earlier, I have ADHD. So for me, I start in the middle and the top and the bottom, halfway around the block. And if I've got a 24-hour deadline, I'm going to hit that deadline because now it's got urgency. My brain is going to be like, we got to hit this. So I just went and dove straight in because I had all that information and all the holistic campaigns in the big spreadsheet already done. I knew I had 100 customer interviews that I'd already gone through. So I had all this preliminary things that's kind of already happening. So I just thought, okay, I just need a story. So I just went through, because I didn't have the physical deck, the PDF, and I just went through thinking about what story we should tell for this audience, keeping my ideal client in mind. And I just dove right in and I just read as many as I could just to work out what would be the best story for them. And I did think the transformation story just intuitively for me would be the best one for our audience, because this kind of audience is a very aspirational, influential kind of I want to be better than X kind of audience. So I think that would really speak to them. So that's why I went straight to that one when I saw it and just made sure that we are accurately telling that story in the language that they speak to. So to anyone who's just discovering their pip decks, I just say, like, have a little bit of an idea of where you want to go and who your ideal client is, and then just dive in and see if that story will work for you. Because obviously it's very different from my client to their audience, to someone who's working with a different kind of field. I'm very lucky because as an audience there that we're selling to, my clients selling to, they're native storytellers. That's what they do, because a lot of them are online telling stories about their business. So this works really well for them. So I knew what kind of story would resonate with them, having worked with this client for a number of years and knowing their ideal client quite well. But for anyone who doesn't kind of know, is just getting started, you just have to start somewhere and just experiment as much as you can, because there's no wrong answers. That's a really great thing. Like, you can't get it wrong. You just keep working on it and changing the direction and see what sticks. And like, it's what do they say? Like, do the phone a friend technique. It's for writing, like phone a friend. And like, what you do is you tell them this story. I'm sorry, no, it's the beer or brunch test. That's what we call it. Like, would you tell this story over beer or brunch? And would it do really well? So that's how you know you've got a good story. And the other thing is, if you were abducted by aliens, how would you tell this story in a way that they would understand? So they're the two things I always remember as well when I want to tell a good story. So that would probably help you when you dive into pip decks. Just say, would this kind of story survive the beer or brunch test? Or if I was abducted by aliens, would the aliens understand this story? And then you can just like let pip decks build it out for you.
That's really, I like that. The version I have on a similar one. It's interesting how we've arrived at the same test by
Yeah.
different directions. So my version of it is I call it the mum on the phone test, where
Yep.
you
Yeah.
get to the end of the day and it's the evening, phone rings, it's your mum, and she goes, how's your day, love? And you, oh, it's a fantastic day, right? And then she says, oh, what happened? And the next thing that comes out of your mouth can't be a kind of strategy statement of, oh well, we realigned customer expectations around a series of sustainable and innovative goals.
Yep.
No, we can't. You can't do that. Whereas you can say, well, talking to this woman on Instagram who runs a business selling fitness products, and she finally saw she got it, and now she's really excited about the thing we're doing. Okay, well that's okay. So that little test, yeah, beer or brunch. Would this thing you're trying to tell us, would you say it to another human being in
Yeah.
conversation, right? And if the answer is, well, not really, because if I tried saying this, they would be going, oh, or then that is really interesting. The alien one I've not thought of before, because I always thought there was been
Yeah.
friendly conversations, but that's quite an
Yeah.
interesting test of, could someone who knew nothing about this still go,
And
oh, okay, I see what you
yeah.
mean. Yeah,
And it's
interesting.
good because my client now works in the is now expanding to the Brazilian and Latin American market.
Right.
So we just need to be aware of how things translate from English into other languages. So the alien test, if we make it really simple,
Yeah, yeah.
they should be able to understand the universal story,
Yep.
which is, you know, everyone, if you do the rags to riches, the hero guide, you do
Yep.
all of that kind of storytelling,
Yep.
it should be easy enough to translate for our translators to translate into other languages and hopefully still land the same way. And that's the next thing we're going to find out if that works that way.
Right. That is really interesting. And I again,
Mm,
I would say to people watching and listening, um, there are certain universals,
mm,
I believe, that apply across societies. Obviously, everything things are, the nuances are very different, but the universal around, look, stories about things changing, about turning
mm,
points. I do believe that's universal, and that we kind of, we look around and we sort of, we look at what other people are doing all the time. I think that's universal
mm.
as well. And yeah, so I think there's all sorts of things that I'm hoping. I mean, no one's ever said differently. So I'm hoping within Storyteller Tactics there are all kinds of pretty universal um, elements of human nature reflected in them, that
Mm.
mean they will work. I mean, no one's actually come to us yet, tempting fate now, but nobody has come to us yet and said, this doesn't work in German, or this doesn't work for an audience in China. No one said that yet. So let's see. We
I
might.
think different stories work for different cultures, but
Yes.
yeah, most of them will work. They'll probably choose one that's more aligned with their culture. But yeah, stories that every and that's how they're passed down with folklore and everything. So
Yeah.
it's just a matter of probably different tactics to tell that story.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think so. Okay, Angela, Susan, thank you so much for your time. It's been really useful. And I think the idea of kind of go to the deck with us with go to the do your homework first, do your
Mhm.
research first, then come to the deck and just allow that kind of all that information to sit in the background, and something will come out at you as you go through the deck based on what
Yeah.
you've already got in your head. But I think that idea of you have to kind of have the more homework you do about your audience, yeah, before you come to the story is always going to help, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It's just a matter for me, Storyteller Tactics has really helped solidify all that information. So I'm not sitting there with a whole bunch of information in my brain feeling overwhelmed. It just meant, okay, we just need to unlock this information and make it in a really interesting and a story that really connects to the ideal client. And that's what Storyteller Tactics can help you do. So it just really helps you unpack all that information in a really streamlined way that anyone can understand.
Brilliant. There's an endorsement. Okay, I'm going to
There you
stop
go.
the recording there. Give me a second. Thank you again for your time. And
Thank you. Have fun.